Welcome back into the Red Zone podcast. My name is Colten Bartholomew, UW football beat reporter here for the Wisconsin State Journal, joined by longtime football and basketball beat reporter Jim Polzin, and later on by longtime hockey reporter Todd Milewski. Lots of stuff going on here in UW sports to talk about this week. Jim and I are going to start the show off by talking about the Badgers' exit in the NCAA tournament, what's next for the team, season overview, kind of a wrap-up on the basketball season after they just got bounced by the number one seed Baylor over the weekend. And then with Todd, we talk about the women's hockey team winning the national championship and then the men's team back in the NCAA tournament for the first time since 2014. So a ton of stuff to talk about. Before we take a break real quick, Jim, as you come back from Indy and the whole experience down there in the NCAA tournament bubble, just what was it like compared to previous tournaments that you've covered, just because of the centralized location, everybody kind of being around the same area?
I mean, I can only speak for myself. It sucked. It really sucked. Yeah. Like the word I used was depressing. Just because, and here's why. I've been in Indy when it's hopping because there's a big event in town. I've covered a Final Four there. I've covered Big Ten championship football games there. I've covered Big Ten tournaments. It's a perfect spot for a big time event. Yeah. And it just was dead because understandably people weren't traveling and they were restricted how many people they could put in the gym. Selfishly, it's no way to cover an event when you're doing interviews over Zoom. After the game on Sunday against Baylor, it was so loud in that arena because they're blaring the sound system was blaring with music because the next game was the teams were on the court the next game. Yeah, that I could barely hear Greg Gard and Dimitri Trice. My internet froze in the middle of Greg Gard's press conference, and it sucked. It like we were the only media outlet basically. I mean, there were a couple of TV stations there, but we were the only newspaper to cover the team in person. I was at, I think, 25 games I counted this year. And I felt like I was at a disadvantage on Sunday because I think people at home would have a much easier time because they could actually hear the interview as opposed to where I was. We were at one point, I had to decide whether at Butler, where the game was at Hinkle, they had a media workroom set up outside Hinkle. Like it was in a building away from Hinkle. And there was a 10-minute cooling off period after the game before interviews were supposed to start. And I was kind of sitting there juggling. Do I try to
run over there or
pack up my stuff? Yeah. Bolt, get set up at this media hub before interviews start and risk the possibility of missing them, or do I stay where I am? I chose the latter option, and I, ended up not being a great decision because, again, like all the problems I said. So I don't know. People are probably gonna hear this and sound like I'm whining, but this experience left me with a real sour taste in my mouth. And I'm not sure. I'm sitting here and I'm not blaming anybody either because I don't know what the solution was. This whole season was kind of what's the solution, and I don't have a great solution for how things should have been handled, but there's my rant to start the show. Also,
I say
one more thing. Todd Milewski is killing it, by the way.
Yeah, he is.
His coverage this whole season, I mean, he's always been a really good reporter and coworker. He is absolutely shining this last couple weeks, especially. His ability to handle two programs that are in the midst, that are at the peak of their season, when sometimes those games are being played within hours of each other or at the same time, is just amazing. It's inspiring. And I think, he deserves a shutout because he's doing a great job.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure you guys stick around for the second half of the show. Todd breaks it all down. We talked about that the last couple of episodes, how he's been able to juggle being at a men's game or being at a women's game. And then, the other one's going on. He's watching it on his phone or his laptop while the game's going on. So it's awesome stuff from Todd, and lots more stuff coming for the men's tournament this weekend. So a lot of stuff to get into, like I mentioned, and we're going to do all of that right after this. All right, Jim, let's jump right into the Badgers NCAA tournament showing. They surprised the both of us by playing as well as they did against North Carolina. I don't have the final score in front of me, but it was a blowout. I mean, it was a 20-point game for a good portion of the second half. And that was, I would say, from start to finish, the most effort that we've seen out of Wisconsin, the best shooting performance. I would say most active on offense. They were just moving the ball around, moving bodies. I think that was, if you if you're a fan that's frustrated with how this season went, you look at that North Carolina game and you say, like, that's who we should have been from December on. Like, why did it take us till, the first game in the tournament to show the height of what this team was?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that was kind of who we thought they could be and never really were. I think the caveat, one caveat is who they were playing, I think made a difference. I picked North Carolina because I thought it was a terrible matchup for Wisconsin in terms of offensive rebounding and just the size. Looking, it's easy to look back at a game with 20/20 hindsight, but North Carolina was probably thinking the same thing. This is a bad matchup for us because they do have guys that are, smart and can do the little things. And then if Davison and Trice are going to shoot like that, Wisconsin's going to be tough to beat. So really impressive effort. And for their sake, I'm glad they got to experience one night, 40 minutes of finally feeling good about themselves before reality hit again. But I do think I was impressed. Davison got his moment. He's had a tough season and really shined that game. Trice was good, like I said, but really everybody, like I'd said this on a previous episode, Colten. I thought this team could be really good this year because I thought at the end of last season, everybody played well. Mm-hmm. Not great, but well. And I thought in that game, everybody played well. Davison and Trice were the stars, but I thought Reavers played better. I thought Ford had his moments, Potter, Johnny Davis. Everybody kind of did their part. And that's what I thought would happen more often this season. And that's why I picked them to win the Big Ten. That's why I thought they could be a second weekend NCAA tournament team. So that was kind of on display for 40 minutes. And then I really walked out of that game thinking, okay, they have a chance against Baylor, but they're going to have to play maybe even better than they did, just because right. I knew the level of competition was going to increase, and it was just a completely different matchup and one they had to prepare for on one day turnaround. It's a tough prep in one day.
No, absolutely. And we talked so much last episode about the offensive rebounding prowess that North Carolina had and how much of a problem that had been all year for the Badgers. And I thought that the big guys, Potter and Reavers, and then the wings especially too, did a really good job boxing out. There were a couple of lapses where North Carolina was getting some second chance points, but that was after Wisconsin maybe had like a 15, 16-point lead. So you can live with some lapses there. But I thought just start to finish, that was the best performance they had all year. And then, like you mentioned, you tried in one day, turn around and get ready for one of the best offenses in the country in Baylor. And then all of the weaknesses that North Carolina had, where your backcourt turns it over a bunch and they're not super disciplined with the ball and they can have these kind of miscues offensively. Baylor's got none of that. And they're a better athletic team than Wisconsin, and then they were shooting really, really well. So it was one of those, man, like if Wisconsin can play like that again, but I think playing like that again was shooting for the moon, and it didn't quite happen for Wisconsin against Baylor.
Yeah, two things that stood out to me about the Baylor game were I think you kind of needed Baylor to be off their game a little bit, just maybe miss shots that they normally hit and then make mistakes that they normally don't make. They had 4 turnovers, and they knocked down some big shots. I thought there were some big shots late in the first half that allowed them to kind of stretch that lead from 7 to 13, which I think if you stay at 7 or even cut into that a little bit, it's a completely different game and outlook for the second half. 13 is a tough deficit to come back from. And that's where they found themselves at halftime. And then the turnovers, like I said, Baylor had 4 turnovers. They just weren't sloppy at all. So you combine that with the athleticism and the ability to collect some second chance opportunities. And then defensively, I just thought that Baylor team just gets up in you and makes everything difficult. As open of looks as Trice and Davison got Friday night against North Carolina, those looks were not there on Sunday. There have been games this season where you walk away thinking, wow, Wisconsin had the looks. They just didn't knock down open shots. This wasn't one of those times. There weren't many open shots that they didn't knock down. The looks weren't there. And that's a testament to Baylor's defense. And what we knew going into the game was that they switch everything. They put a lineup on the court that can switch anything. They had their 6'10" center out at times switching onto Trice. And Trice has given up 10 inches to that guy and just can get nothing. You can't get around him. You can't shoot over him. And if you take Demetric Trice out of Wisconsin's offense, it's going to be a struggle. We've seen that for a couple seasons now, and Baylor was able to do that. And I was impressed. I mean, I I'm a little gun shy about making predictions based on how my bracket looks, but would not be surprised to see Baylor playing Gonzaga in the final on that final Monday, because that team's legit.
Yeah. I think everybody is starting to question how good Baylor was because of their COVID pause and then not looking as great in the Big 12 tournament, but then they came into the NCAA tournament ready to go. And you mentioned Baylor only having 4 turnovers, and, Wisconsin's defense isn't always going to get a ton of turnovers because they're not always, jumping into ball pressure and things like that. But just because of the way they can slow a game down, it makes those turnovers more crucial. And then you look at what Wisconsin did, completely out of character, couldn't handle Baylor getting in their face. I mean, what was it, 10 turnovers in the first half? And it ended up being
I think it was 10 total. They had 9 and 29 possessions, I think, at one point. So you're talking every 3 possessions you're turning the ball over for a team that has struggled to score just without turning the ball over. It's a terrible formula, and it's not one that's going to be successful against a really good team.
Right. And I tweeted this out Sunday. I mean, those turnovers, and it wasn't just that, there was only a couple of times I would say that Baylor got like a breakaway layup or a dunk or something off those turnovers. But what happened was those turnovers led to these scoring droughts that have always been a killer for Wisconsin the last couple of years. Like the games that they lost, you can usually point to some droughts. But I have this all in front of me here. There were droughts in the first half of 2 minutes and 13 seconds, 3 minutes and 8 seconds, 3:18 and 3:12. So that's all in one half. You have, there's 15 minutes of not scoring. And then in the second half, there was 2:11 right to start the second half. And then when Wisconsin actually got back in the game, I think it was a 7-point game at the 7:25 mark, then they don't score for nearly 5 minutes straight. So the small window that they had to maybe get back in the game really just got taken away. And that's a credit not only to Baylor's defense, but then just to the fact that Wisconsin wasn't able to figure anything out for what Baylor was doing to them. They whatever they tried just wouldn't work, and that's a credit to what Baylor was doing to them.
Yeah, it comes down to a personnel thing, and we saw that at times. I mean, Jonathan Davis can create his own shot. Trice can sometimes, but really Baylor made that almost impossible on Sunday. Beyond that, how are they going to get the shots? They went to a 2 big lineup. We didn't put this in the notes, but Wisconsin went to a 2 big lineup for a stretch in the second half, and it worked with Potter and Reavers on the court at the same time. And then Baylor brought Meyer back in the game, and Greg Gard went back to his non-2 big lineups, and a lot of people on my timeline were complaining about it. I'll go back to what I've said all along is who's going to guard Meyer if, Nate Reavers would have had to have guarded Meyer, and that's just a terrible matchup. Like you're going to maybe you're going to get something on the other end of the court. You're going to be scoring more, but I think you're going to be set with bad matchups on defense, and it's going to lead to kind of just trading baskets. And, Gard didn't want to do that and didn't think they could afford to do that at that point of the game. So that's kind of how that worked out. But again, like we go back to the offense, this offense has limitations in terms of personnel, and we can talk about the future a little bit more later, but you got to get more playmakers in. Jonathan Davis can't do it alone, and they need more guys that can create shots, or you have to find ways to create shots for them. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times this season, that was the case. You could, they were missing wide open 3-point looks. They were missing at the rim. I just didn't see it Sunday. I didn't see the opportunities that they normally have. And I think, again, that's Baylor's defense was not statistically, Baylor's defense was supposed to be its strong suit.
Yeah.
But I thought they played really hard and really well and really disciplined on Sunday against Wisconsin.
Yeah, and that's one of those things when you go into a tournament game, like, how good the Baylor backcourt was and, some of the best shooters in the country in that backcourt. And then Meyer comes off the bench and starts torching you. It's just that's one of those situations like, what are we supposed to do at a certain point? But
I thought they did a good job. Like Jared Butler was their first team All-American. I thought Wisconsin did a good job on him for, certainly the first half. Maceo Teague had come in really, really hot. And I thought, he was a non-factor for a lot of that game. Mitchell is a really good player, really, quick and slippery, and he's tough to guard one-on-one. And if Baylor spreads you out, it's going to be tough to keep him out of the paint. And he's done that against a lot of teams, not just Wisconsin. But you're right. Then they bring Meyer off the bench, and he just, he had a really good game. And that's what Wisconsin couldn't afford. They needed to play a perfect game defensively and get a little help. And I just didn't think that happened.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So tournament's over now for the Badgers. Season's over now. I just want to look big picture here. We're going to get into the future, like Jim said, in a couple of minutes here, because it's a really fascinating offseason coming up for the Badgers. But when you look at this 2021 year or 2021 year, I think you have to give this team credit for the fact that I would say I think they were one of the, 2-3 Big Ten teams that didn't have to miss at least a game or reschedule games because of COVID. Like, they did all the stuff you were supposed to do off the court to keep themselves safe and, play through this virus and all that stuff. And they deserve credit for that. But you look at the on-court results, it was not a good season. And it's nice to get a tournament win, but this was not a good year for the Badgers.
Yeah, I don't know what the word to use. I mean, I think disappointed is one I've used. And I think part of that, that's not just the outside world saying that. I think they're disappointed. They came in having won a Big Ten title and expected to do so again. And they came in expected to make a deep run in March, in part because they didn't get that opportunity last year. And they felt like it was kind of a missing piece. So it's hard to look at 18-13 with 10 losses to the best teams you've played and no wins against those teams and, call it anything else other than a disappointing season for them. They didn't live up to expectations, their own or ours. And, I've kind of been going back and forth. Were these expectations realistic? And, in retrospect, it's really easy to say they were overrated, but they had everybody back from a team that was a co-Big Ten champion. And that, I know they won their last 8 games, and I've had this discussion with people on Twitter. Yes, they went 8-0. But even before that, they put themselves in position to make a run at the Big Ten title by winning at Ohio State early last season. That was a number 4 team. They beat Maryland at home. That was like a number 17 team. They beat Michigan State at home without Davison. That was like a number 14 team. So they had shown promise. Mm-hmm. They've been very inconsistent, but they had shown promise. But they at least were in the Big Ten title race and then finished strong and earned a share of it. And only lost Brevin Pritzel and gained Johnny Davis. I think people ranking them in the top 10 and picking them to win the Big Ten was not unrealistic. But they didn't live up to those expectations. And trying to figure out why is something I've been trying to do for 2 months. I don't know why. I don't have an answer why. You can go individually down the list of if this guy would have played better. And I'll just go back to what I said before, is that they needed everybody to kind of take a step forward. I don't know if they needed anybody to make a jump, but they needed everybody to take a step forward. And I don't know, beyond Trice, who I thought was better this year than he was last year, I don't know that anybody else made that step. I don't. And it's just, and Nate Reaver's production went backward, and he was the one guy that probably had the highest ceiling on the team in terms of, could he be the John Lure type that makes the big jump? And not only did he not do that, but he went backwards. And again, like I've talked to Nate, I've talked to his family, I've talked to coaches. I don't know why that didn't happen. And I'm not sure we ever will, but it's frustrating as a beat writer not to have answers after the season about why things didn't happen. And that's kind of where I am at this point.
Yeah. And it was weird to see a Wisconsin team. And we joked about it on the podcast a few times, Jim, where every game seemed like the same thing. It was going to be tight, and then they were going to blow it in the end. And they were like, it was the same 3 or 4 things that were going to happen every time they played a good team. And it was one of those situations where it's like, that's not Wisconsin's character. That's like not a program identity that they have. Like, they're usually a team that can figure some things out, and they're that team that usually finds a way to play better late in the season, or at least correct the mistakes that keep plaguing them. And this team just never seemed to be able to get over that. And I think part of that is because, as we've talked about many times, they were just athletically at a deficit against a lot of the teams they played. And you can only make up for that with hustle and energy so much. And that was an issue too, that they didn't always have that fight in a lot of the games that they lost. But I just think that it's weird to see a Wisconsin team not figure out some of these things when, especially, as talked about ad nauseum, how experienced these guys are, how many games they all had under their belt, especially together. You would have thought they'd been able to figure out some of these issues, or at least be able to mask them a little bit better than they did against the good teams.
Yeah, you're right. And, I go back to something I said a couple weeks ago, is that the Big Ten kind of got better around them. The best teams made strides. Wisconsin kind of stayed the same. And I think you look at that, and maybe that's just again a personnel thing where these guys, for the most part, had reached as far as they were going to go from a was a Brad Davison or a Aleem Ford going to make a jump, right? We're just from a what more was there out there? Were those guys going to get any better athletically or anything? Was there nowhere for them to go? Whereas a guy like Ayo Dosunmu or Kofi Coburn were so athletically gifted, and then if they add little parts to their games, they can make jumps. Those guys can make jumps. Joe Wieskamp. I'm just listing some of the guys around the league that got better this season and were kind of, they had higher ceilings. And I think a lot of the guys in this Wisconsin group just kind of were who they were. And I don't know that they were going to, make big jumps. So, yeah, I mean, that's one possible explanation, is just that they kind of, they had kind of maxed out in terms of potential, I guess is the way to put it. And other teams around them didn't, and they got better. And some of them, in some cases, they added players to the mix that helped them. Illinois added Adam Miller and Andre Curbelo. Michigan added a couple grad transfers. And so there was a mix of newness to the existing that allowed those teams to kind of catapult forward. And Wisconsin just kind of was, the same group it was, and didn't make that push forward.
For sure. All right. So we've been talking about it a little bit throughout the podcast here, but let's move the eyes forward here, Jim, where this offseason is going to be so strange because, and you wrote a really good piece. Make sure you guys check it out at madison.com. Went up Tuesday, so you guys can find it there, about how this team, this program is at a situation where you don't know, you can't put a starting five on paper right now and feel like great about that prediction. Like you can't really, and I don't think Greg Gard could either. Honestly, if he was being truthful with himself, I don't think he knows the five that he's going to be able to depend on. And I think this is one of the more uncertain off seasons that the Badgers have ever gone into, because it's rare to have this large of a senior class that played this many minutes altogether the last two seasons, all kind of leaving, or, we're going to get into that too, but just the mix of maybe leaving and definitely leaving. And then this freshman class that came in this year that was very highly touted and thought of, and then the 2021 class, and a lot of talent there too. And all of them are going to want shots and, at least deserve a look to see, if they can play early. It's going to be a really interesting situation to see what the Badgers look like next year.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even try to put a starting five. I mean, some people did, and, good for them. But it's so hard if you don't know what seniors are coming back, if you don't know what the grad transfer or any transfer market, what they're willing to do and who they can possibly get. It's tough. It's tough to make projections, and it's probably going to be this way going forward if the NCAA is allowing transfers free, one free transfer. I think there's going to be a lot more roster building on the fly than there ever was, and it's a challenge. I'm interested to talk to Greg Gard about that. Is just it's not how this program has operated necessarily ever, but you kind of got to do it now, because that's just kind of the way college basketball is going to be. So you're not going to know what your roster is going to look like. You're going to have to save some scholarships. You're not going to know who's leaving. That's the other thing, is like, this program's had some attrition, over the years. I think there's been 6 guys that have left Greg Gard's program with eligibility remaining. And that's probably below the norm for most programs.
Oh, absolutely.
But, yeah, but it still exists, So I'm hesitant to even throw out names, because I don't know what some of these guys are thinking in terms of, it just seems so easy now for athletes to go somewhere for a year, not like it, or see something better and be able to move. It's so easy to move now. And so, like, even when I was writing that story the other day, putting names in these was just kind of like, is this going to look silly in 2 weeks if news breaks that player X is in the transfer portal? I don't know. The uncertainty is unsettling, and I can't imagine what a coaching staff it feels like. But, I mean, if you want to talk about, let's say no seniors come back, this team's going to be really young next year. unless it adds some experience. And the positions I mentioned in the story were point guard. They're going to be really young at point guard and center. If you can add some or one body in one of those two areas or both, that's great. Also, it's not easy to add a difference maker, an experienced difference maker, but they could really use one to pair alongside Johnny Davis, just so he's not doing everything alone next year. If they've got a guy alongside of him, I think that makes life easier on him. So, those are, I don't know, I'm not saying they're going to add three guys, a veteran guard, a veteran big man, and a difference maker that can score on the wing. But I do think that's three areas to look at in terms of what can help this program going forward. And the great unknown is kind of, do any of the seniors come back? And I don't know that we're going to find that out for a couple of days or maybe beyond.
Yeah, let's stick with the seniors quick, because I have some thoughts about the transfer portal possibilities I want to get into you with, but start with the seniors. From their Instagrams and their social media posts, we've got a good feeling, at least, or are pretty sure that Nate Reavers, Demetric Trice, and Liam Ford are all going to be moving on. So I think you can pretty safely say those three are gone. And that leaves Brad Davison, Micah Potter, and Trevor Anderson. Now, when you specifically speak about that center spot, a guy like Micah Potter coming back would help a lot, because at least you've got an experienced starter you can throw out there. He's got some issues. We've talked about it many times. He is not the greatest defensive center out there, and I wouldn't say he's a great rim protector. But at the same time, what he can give you offensively, and at least he's a big body. So you would maybe, if you're Greg Gard, say maybe that's the priority, is locking down that center spot, and then you go point guard hunting in the transfer portal. But I think the bigger ones is in the backcourt, when you consider what's already on the roster and guys like Jonathan Davis and some of these younger guys that came in this class. And then you look at next year when Chucky Hepburn's going to be here and some of these other guys. If Brad Davison were to come back, it makes a very crowded backcourt. And then Trevor Anderson too. He's earned a rotational role there. It just makes a very crowded backcourt. And then Gard would have to decide, like, am I building for the future? And, I think you look at next year, you're going to be in a tough spot either way, even if all three of these seniors come back. I don't think you're going to be a super talented team compared to the rest of the Big Ten. But it's one of those things where you've got to decide, like, okay, do we say, hey, we love you, but it's time to move on because we've got these younger guys that we've got to develop for the sake of the program? Or do you bring them back and then hope you're a couple of wins better in 2021?
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't know that any of those guys are going to make this a Big Ten title contender. And it's tough to say, too, without looking at who's coming back elsewhere in the Big Ten. The Big Ten, I think, is going to be much less competitive than it was last year. I think that's safe to say, because they're going to lose some really high-end players. So I don't think the league's going to be as good as it was. So I think you can have a better chance of competing in this league next year, even if you're not as good. But I don't know that those guys are going to necessarily put you over the top. And then I just wonder whether it's time for kind of the next generation to kind of have its season and grow. And there might be a lot of growing pains. It might result in you missing the NCAA tournament, but are you better set up for 2 years and beyond if you do it that way? Another thing to consider, Brad Davison and Micah Potter and Trevor Anderson could go play somewhere else if they wanted to. It doesn't.
Sure, yes.
Them deciding to play somewhere doesn't necessarily have to be at UW. And I do wonder, it's going to be tough for Greg Gard to tell those guys, no, I don't want you. How do you tell a 4-year starter like Brad Davison that, you're not welcome here? I just don't see that happening. But I do think, like you said, you got to kind of consider, are you stunting other players' growth by these guys coming back? And, I don't know. It's tricky. It's a really tricky situation. And I'm curious to see how it's going to play out because I didn't, and the Micah Potter thing, I didn't even consider the option of him coming back. I really didn't.
Right.
And I still think it's very low. I would still be shocked if Micah Potter is playing for Wisconsin next year. He's got an interest. I think he's a guy that can go make money somewhere, whether it's Europe or whatever. Because I think he's got the skills offensively to do that. He's in a situation where he's got a fiance who plays volleyball at Loyola, who is also a Division I athlete who will have the option of coming back next year, I think. So I don't know. I briefly talked to his, I traded messages with his dad yesterday, and he said Micah's just taking some time to spend with her, and then to talk over this with the family, and then decide. So that's why we haven't seen an immediate announcement from him. Whereas I think the other three guys have kind of known all along that they're done. And Davison is same thing. I talked to someone in his life, and they said he hasn't thought about it all year, or hasn't talked publicly about it or privately about it, because he wanted to focus on the here and now. And now the season's over, he's going to take some time to kind of think about what he wants to do next. He wants to be a coach. So that's something you have to decide about, whether playing another season would be beneficial to getting his coaching career started, or if it's time to just go into that. So there's a lot to think about. I mean, I don't envy these guys, because it's complicated stuff.
Yeah, and you got to take that time, because you don't want the sting of the disappointment of this year, or some of the emotions of getting bounced in the tournament or something like that, to influence your decision. That's a big life decision. An extra year of college for either of these guys, or getting started in your professional life. It's a big deal, and we talked about it in football too. And it's just one of those things that you've got to make sure that you're giving yourself time to make the right decision, as opposed to the one that just feels good in the moment.
Yeah. But the flip side of that is it's a tricky situation for the UW coaching staff too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we just talked about all the transfer stuff. How long can they wait? Do they miss out on anybody because they are waiting on decisions from their, the guys that are the seniors, the current seniors? I don't know. I don't know what you do. I don't know what the perfect answer for that is. Again, it's tough to tell a kid that's been loyal to you for 4 years to, go find something else. But we'll see. I mean, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, the waiting is a great point that you make, because we're seeing transfer market or transfer portal action of like unbelievable proportions. Like the amount of kids that are going to be looking for scholarships that aren't going to be there, and it's going to be wild next year to see the make up some of these rosters, and how some of the gymnastics that gets pulled to super team possibilities. If and just to use a Big Ten example, like all the guys that are leaving from Penn State, and like Marcus Carr is in the portal now from Minnesota. Like, could one of these guys jump to an Illinois or a Michigan next year, because hey, those coaches saw him, they know he can play in the Big Ten, and we've got, let's say if you're Michigan, we've got Hunter Dickinson back next year probably, and we can make a run if we bring in a really good guard. Like, it's going to be so crazy to see what happens just timing wise, and the amount of good players that are in the portal. And then that thought brings us to, does Wisconsin, in that type of recruiting setting where you're not starting that relationship at 14, 15 and building it over years, like, is Wisconsin going to be in a position that they're saying, hey, look at where we're at, what you could do here as you're already in your college career? Like, do they have the ammo to compete in that market? And I don't know yet. I mean, I think you could compare this both to football and basketball, because they haven't been very active in the transfer markets, or at least in the high impact transfers. It's a solid question of, is Wisconsin a school that transfers look at and say, hey, I want to go there? And we'll see how that gets answered. The way that it's gone so far, I just don't even know if the coaches have been, seeking that.
Yeah, I mean, every year they've kind of kicked the tires on some guys, and you bring up a really good point. There's kind of two parts to this, and you bring up one really good point, is this the destination place? And we've seen in high school recruiting that it's not, that they have trouble landing the high end, the top 50 kids, right? Even top 100 kids have been kind of, sometimes tough to get here. I think it's going to be the same with with transfers. Like, is a guy who's going to have other big time programs after him, does he want to come to Wisconsin? How much does the offense impact kids? Do they want to play at a faster tempo? And I think one thing is, Wisconsin did play as fast as it has in a while this year. I mean, this tempo, if you look at KenPom, it's not remarkably faster, but
right.
They did play faster. I think you saw it in North Carolina game where Brad Davison came down and fired some threes in transition. I mean, they're willing to run if they have the right personnel. They're not going to get into a running contest with, the Iowas and Illinois of the world. But they're willing to speed up a little bit. So they kind of have to sell that without necessarily having shown it on the court per se. And I think they've done a pretty good job in recruiting of selling that to guys like Johnny Davis and Lauren Bowman that, hey, we want to play faster. You come here, we're going to play faster. So now can you do that to transfers? The other part of this that I hit on it a little bit in the story is, and I want to know this from Greg Gard, is how important is culture? You always talk about how important culture is. You're speed dating to a certain degree with these transfers. You run the risk of bringing in the wrong kind of fit. And how do you balance that? How do you balance needs in terms of on-court needs and locker room fit? Because, you've talked about for so long how culture is important and how this group of seniors did a good job of kind of passing along the culture to this current group of freshmen. Do you want to disrupt that by bringing in something that a guy that, doesn't fit in this culture and doesn't, is kind of out for himself, and not the team. So it's all very tricky, and it's tricky in a pandemic where you're not getting to spend time with kids in person necessarily. And like you said, this is not years and years and years of relationships. It's days, and it's a lot of this fact-finding mission is sped up. So I'm curious to see how it all plays out. And I'm curious to see what Greg Gard says about it, and just what he's looking at.
Yeah. And I wonder too, how involved or how helpful the coach of the program a kid is transferring from is to coaches of the places that he might be looking at. Because obviously if a kid's transferring, there are some issues, and maybe it's just, hey, I didn't get enough playing time, I don't see a path here for me. And that's simple enough. But if there's other issues, and obviously the kid's not going to broadcast it, or maybe he has a different view of it. I just wonder what that relationship is like for coaches when you're talking about transfers, because I think there's the emotional side or the egotistical side of coaches too, where, hey, you're leaving me, I'm not going to help you out. Like, all right, have a good one.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. And then you also have there's different types of transfers. Are you bringing in someone from a high major who, like you said, just didn't play and needs a new fit or whatever? Or are you bringing in someone from a low major who's really had a good career and wants something new, wants to challenge himself at a new level? There's two parts to this too. What kind of evaluation are you going to get from the coach who's like a jilted lover, the mid-major coach who spent his time developing this kid and then poof, he's gone? I do feel for those types, that level of coach. What kind of honest evaluation are you going to get from that coach? And then how do you evaluate that player? I'll give you a perfect example. Storm Murphy, who's a Middleton kid who played at Wofford and announced about early this month that he's going to transfer. Now, he committed to Virginia Tech, which made perfect sense because his old college coach went to Virginia Tech, Mike Young. So I kind of thought that was the front runner all along, but I looked at him and said, hey, okay, senior or experienced guard that can shoot. Those are needs for Wisconsin going into next season.
Right.
Is that someone Wisconsin will go after? And my thing is, how do you evaluate a guy that plays at that level? Yes, he lit it up scoring wise, but can he defend Big Ten athletes? Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to sit there and watch tape, and it's comparing apples to oranges, right? So I'm interested. I just think there's so many complications with this, and that's it's going to be interesting to see what UW ends up with and how they even go about this. It's fascinating. You used the word fascinating. I think that's a perfect way to describe it because that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, this offseason is going to be crazy. Make sure you're following along on madison.com with all of Jim's work as this goes through, because like we're saying, this is going to be a year that really does set up the next 2 or 3 at least for Wisconsin. And the recruiting that they've done and the guys that they're bringing in, you believe that could possibly be the basis of a Big Ten contending team. But I think a lot of it's going to come down to the actions of this offseason, bringing those guys in, bringing them along. And it's going to be something that if you make the wrong mistake right now, I think there's ripple effects that are going to hurt or help this program for the next 2-3 years at least.
Could not have said that any better. I think that's a great way of putting it.
Yeah, for sure. All right, before we get going here, I wanted to ask you, because you brought it up a little bit earlier, Jim. We were not right about the Big Ten showing up and showing out for the Big Ten or the NCAA tournament. We're here getting ready for the Sweet 16, and only Michigan is still alive. Ohio State made me delete my bracket app the second day because they were in my Final Four, and I just was like, well, this isn't worth paying attention to anymore. So how's your bracket looking?
Not awful, but not great either. I mean, like, I know I think you kind of laughed at my Alabama to the Final Four pick, and I know our executive editor, I'm not exactly right yet, but our executive editor, Jason Adrian, listens to this podcast too, and I know he kind of gave me some grief because he was surprised by Alabama to the Final Four. And I think that's, they still have to get through Michigan and or Florida State. So I'm not confident, but this team still, I think, is scary and could get to the Final Four. I had Baylor in the Final Four, so that's still alive. I had Gonzaga in the Final Four. I lost Illinois. I thought Illinois would be in the title game. I just thought that team was peaking at the right time and trending upward and had everything. And that result just stunned me. Of any Big Ten loss, that was the one. And it's just, I knew Porter Moser was a good coach. I knew that Loyola team plays great defense and has a great system. I just did not expect Illinois to be shut down the way it was.
Yeah, pretty inexcusable for Underwood to not change anything, like to just expect the high screen roll to work eventually in that game, and when clearly Loyola was ready for it and had all the answers, and to not really try to change anything. It was a bad look for them, and because just this Krutwig guy somehow outplaying Kofi Coburn, you just look at him, it's like, that's not right. That shouldn't happen on a basketball court.
I mean, it's crazy that Wisconsin beat that Loyola team 3
It
months
is.
ago.
It is wild to think.
And handily,
Yeah. It's a wild, disappointing year for Wisconsin, and it's been a wild tournament. I will say that after a year without the tournament, it is nice to just have this ridiculous. I mean, there's one region where the highest seed remains like a 4, and there's like 11, 12, and 14. I mean, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I'm looking for, like, obviously when you're covering a tournament, you don't get to watch, like, Purdue. That Purdue game was going on basically right after the Wisconsin-North Carolina game, and I didn't really get to see it. So the one advantage to being done with the season, my season, is I can kind of unwind and watch games next weekend. And how do you feel about the setup? The Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday start to it, and now the Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday.
I hate it.
Okay.
I was talking about how people felt. Yeah, I was talking about, the first weekend it wasn't too bad until you got to Monday, and it's like, it helped that Monday's games all were pretty bad, all pretty lopsided, but I'm getting ready for this weekend. It's like, wait a minute, they don't play till Saturday now? Like this, it stinks. I don't like it. I mean, I didn't understand it when this started, like what the benefit was for that.
I think delaying everything gave them a chance to get their ducks in order with testing, and they didn't want to rush that process at the start of it, and then give teams enough time between to, just kind of spread it out a little bit. So it's interesting. What did you think of the, Iowa has to play a team that got a no contest into the second round, which we knew could probably, I'm surprised only one game has gotten canceled, that only one team has had to drop out. That's actually, to me, kind of an upset that it's only been one so far. And I'm really fearful that a Sweet 16 or Elite 8 game has to be a no contest. I think that's a terrible scenario that could happen yet. I'm just kind of crossing my fingers that it doesn't. I just don't want, for the sake of college basketball, I don't want that to happen. But, I can't imagine Iowa was real thrilled to be playing a team that was fresh on Monday.
Oh, yeah. If I was a player on Iowa, I would be furious about it and complain. But at the same time, 3 of our 5 starters didn't score. So it's kind of on you. Like at a certain point.
And 5 of their 5 starters didn't play any defense.
Yeah, you let up 60% shooting and 3 of your starters didn't score. Like, you can complain about the other team being rested, but that's hard to really, that doesn't hold a lot of water when you look at how you played. So tough one there. Tough one for the Big Ten overall. But Jim, what can people expect? It's different now with the season not on, but what do you got anything in the hopper next couple of weeks?
Well, actually, it looks like I'm going to get Greg Gard soon for kind of a postseason wrap up. That, it's such a weird season. That would typically happen. Usually you'd be covering them somewhere like San Jose, and he'd stand outside his locker room for 10, 15 minutes, and you kind of ask questions about the future. That just wasn't possible. And I'd reached out after the season ended earlier this week, and I think he needed a couple of days to just unwind. I think he's exhausted. I think the staff is exhausted, and understandably so. I get it. It's been a long year, really. It's been a long 2 years. And I think he needed to come up for air. So I'm hoping to talk to him, and some of the stuff we talked about, like the transfer stuff is intriguing to me. And, them kind of being at I hate to use the word crossroads. I don't think that's the right word. But it's an off season of transition is how I put it in my story earlier this week. And I think that's true. It's an interesting time in this program, and I'm kind of hearing his thoughts on that too. So, that's one thing on my immediate calendar. I do think, I'm going to probably get into some of the guys that are going to show up next season. The Chucky Hepburns of the world. I'd like to do something on him. I haven't really done anything big on him. Marcus Ilver, I have a story that's, pretty much ready to go. And I've never really touched on him, the kid from Estonia. It's going to be, as much as I say it's going to be a busy off season, that's going to keep me busy, and that's fine. I'm interested in kind of digging into some of the new faces.
For sure. All right, so make sure you're following along there on madison.com, and you can follow Jim on Twitter too, Jim Polzin, WSJ. And then for me this week, we have a story on Isaac Townsend, the transfer defensive end from Oregon that's coming into Wisconsin. He's hoping to get here in May. He's got to figure out school and actually like physically moving here and all that type of stuff. But the interesting thing there is they kind of hinted, and when I say they, I'm talking about like Saeed Khalif and some of the other recruiting guys, they kind of hinted that one of the only things that they might be a player in the transfer market would be a defensive end or somebody on the D line. And then when you have Isaiah Loudermilk and Garrett Rand both leaving this offseason, it became even a bigger need. So interesting story on him. And he hasn't, it's going to be interesting because he hasn't played since high school because he was at Oregon for 2 years and didn't play. They've got Kayvon Thibodeau on their D-line, a surefire top 5 pick next year. Reps are tough to come by out there in Eugene, but it's going to be fun to see what he can do because just when you look at athletically and size-wise, he could be a really good defensive lineman. It's just going to be the development and giving him the chance to get on the field, and maybe that's what Wisconsin can do. So look out for that hopefully on Friday.
First big project for Ross Kalagi,
Yeah, exactly. And he said that's talking to him and talking to Jim Leonard about what they see for him. It was a big reason why he came here. They really laid out the picture really well for him. So interesting stuff from him and something to kind of sink our teeth into as we're about a week away from spring practices starting. So interesting times for the football team coming up.
Yeah, so that news kind of came. When did that news break again? Was that Friday?
Yeah, it was Friday, 30 minutes before the Badgers basketball game started.
I thought. I remember I was somewhere and I was like, kind of did a double take that, whoa, this is news and there's other stuff going on. And so, yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we're going to take a quick break, and then we are going to be back with Todd Milewski breaking down the women's hockey team winning the national championship and then the men's team getting back in the NCAA tournament. So, Jim, thanks for jumping on with us. And for everybody else, we'll be taking a quick break and be right back. All right, we are back with Todd Milewski to talk about some Badger hockey and what an exciting time it is for Badger hockey as a whole. Both programs, the women just won the national championship on Saturday. We're definitely going to get into that. And then the men's team is back into the NCAA tournament for the first time since 2014. So exciting stuff going on in both programs. Todd, I know it's been kind of a whirlwind last couple of weeks. How you feeling about everything you've been getting to write about the last couple of weeks?
Well, it's a fun time of the year, especially when, we've seen the last few years, the women's team's been, going to the finish line basically every season. The men's team hasn't been there, like you said, since 2014. So we haven't had this kind of crossover at the middle point of March a whole lot in the last few years. So it's fun to be able to cover two teams that are doing pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with the women. Just coming off a national championship win, defended their title that they didn't get to last year with the COVID canceling the tournament. They win 2-1 over Northeastern in overtime. I was able to watch the whole game as I'm watching March Madness as well. What an an exciting game. I mean, you could tell those are very evenly matched teams. If they play 7 times or 9 times, whatever you want to do, it's probably going to go to the last game every time. Both of those teams they each had runs in that game that it seemed like the Badgers were dominating like pretty much the whole first period. Then the second, Northeastern was getting all the chances. It was a very even matchup, and that's what you want in a national championship game.
Yeah, 2 really balanced teams. I think the Badgers had a little bit of advantage in depth in terms of forwards, and that's, they got their first goal off their third line, which is where that depth comes into play. But Northeastern puts their top line right back out there and they score 30 seconds later. So that's it was kind of that best on best kind of a matchup that you do like to see in those situations. And I thought it was really good for the sport to be able to showcase that. This hadn't been on an ESPN platform ever before.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It had been on Big Ten Network for a few years before that. And then it was kind of a piecemeal set up where you were lucky if you got anything on TV at all. And there were web streams and things like that before BTN came on board. So yeah, it was, if you're getting more eyeballs on it, as we hope there were, that was a great game to put out there in terms of just, bang for your buck if you're a viewer.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the 6th national championship for the Badgers. That ties the national record with Minnesota so that was 2001 season was the first NCAA championship.
Right. Minnesota had a championship before that they counted. I forget who it was through, but it was the precursor to the NCAA coming on and taking over the women's hockey tournament. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. So we're going to ignore that previous one, stick with NCAA ones. Badgers tie for the most in the nation for national championships. And the winning goal in overtime, we've talked about her before on this podcast, Daryl Watts, Patty Kazmaier Award finalist. She's behind the net, and she basically just throws it off a defender and it goes in. Didn't know it was off a defender. I love seeing your interview with her after the game.
Right.
That she didn't know what happened outside of winning a national championship with the goal. And I love that Mark Johnson, the Badgers head coach, had no idea what happened other than his team just won a national championship like an hour after the game even. So
right.
What a moment. What a way not only to win a national championship for the Badgers, but I felt so bad for that defender from Northeastern because she's trying to do the right thing and keep people out from in front of the net, and then it just bounces off her into the goal. She just dropped, and I just felt bad for her.
Yeah, you look at that play a couple more times, and you see people doing what they're supposed to do. The goalie is maybe she came off her post before she should have, but she's looking the other way. She's trying to keep an eye on Watts, who, you have to keep an eye on her whenever she's on the ice. The defender is going down to get in the way of a centering pass. People on the flanks are disrupting what could be passing opportunities. But yeah, then Watts just comes out of nowhere and throws the puck out front. She says she was intending to hit the goalie and bounce it in off of her, but it went in off of the defender, and it still counts the same. It doesn't, years later, we're going to be talking about how Daryl Watts scored the overtime goal to win the national championship. And, maybe we'll remember that it was from behind the net, maybe not, but we're going to remember that it's a goal that gave Wisconsin a championship. And I got to give you credit, because earlier in the night, you were texting me saying Badgers need Watts to snipe one here. And while it wasn't a snipe, they did get Watts to get the goal that gets them a championship.
Right. And because I was texting Todd at intermissions, like the evenness of that matchup, the Northeastern wasn't going to let up any cheap goals, and the Badgers weren't either. So it definitely was going to come down to who could make a play, and Watts was able to do it for him. I mentioned it earlier on when we started talking about this, Todd. This team, back-to-back championships, wasn't able to defend their title in 2020 after winning it in 2019. But you could tell that that was motivation for them. Like, they thought they were the best team going into last year's tournament before it gets canceled. Then they come out this year. Obviously, it's a different team. You have some different people coming in. Lacey Eden, obviously a huge addition down the stretch. But just a really special championship when you consider what this team went through to have that chance ripped away last season, and then to get it done this year.
Yeah, and when you think about it, it was really quite a different team from 2020 to 2021 in that you had a new starting goalie. The previous season, Kristen Campbell had established herself as, one of the best goalies in the country, if not the best, and especially in big games. And she was gone. Abby Rock is gone. I mean, that's a pretty big piece to miss down the middle of the ice. And so it did kind of, and maybe not to the core, but it changed a lot of what the team was. And so, yeah, you had to have freshmen step in. You had to have, a goalie. Kennedy Blair had to come in and as a grad transfer, and she was given the opportunity, and she took it. She played big in big games. So it was a quite a different run, but it was built on what they had established. Obviously, this is a program that's been established for years, but over the past couple of years has built a team that isn't going to win every game, but they're going to be right there at the finish. And so they're going to be, as good of a chance as anyone. They're going to have as good of a chance as anyone to win it at the end, because in the tournament, once you get in, I feel like kind of anything can happen. And it's the same on the men's side too. But on the women's side, they've gotten through the quarterfinal round with pretty much with ease in the last 5 years. But then you get into the Frozen Four, where it's, one bounce, one bad game, one, penalty kill that doesn't go well, and you're done. But that's happened to them. 2018, they had, maybe their worst game of the season in the national semifinals, and they lost. They come back in 19 and win it. They didn't get a chance last year. They come back again this year and win it. And so that's, it does tell you that the team is built on a pretty solid footing, and that starts with Mark Johnson. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, you don't win 6 championships by accident. And it really
it's spread out like this. This is
starting in 2006. Yeah. But I forget what it is off the top of my head, but I think they've been in 9 of the last 15 national championship games. And so that tells you that this is, probably right now in this era, that the 15-year era, you can't match that. That's a team. That's a program that has just built and rebuilt enough every time to be right at the top of the class.
Absolutely. And I think that's when you mentioned you're always going to remember that Daryl Watts made the overtime goal, maybe not the context, but when you look back at this team, I think the thing that's going to stick out is they were able to fight off some really good teams, not only in this tournament, but in the conference this year. In the Big Ten. I mean, just this team's ability to overcome what gets thrown in front of them time after time after time. That's going to be one of those things. I feel like if you were paying attention and were able to follow this team, that's going to be the thing that kind of defines them maybe going forward, is that this team was able to overcome pretty much every challenge that got thrown in front of them. Especially like you mentioned, they go up, all the momentum's on their side. Then 30 seconds later, it's a tie game again, and it's right back to where they were. There's no, letting off the gas in the national championship game. So it was a really impressive performance by that whole team. Yeah,
the WCHA does prepare teams like Wisconsin and Minnesota and Ohio State and Duluth for, the big stage, because those are the kind of teams you're going to play in those best games. I mean, a lot of them are from the WCHA, if you really look at it. Yeah. The WCHA has won 17 of the 20 national championships, NCAA championships that have been given. And that's not by accident either. I mean, I think we can recognize that there are good programs kind of throughout the course of the 21 years, 20 plus years of NCAA women's hockey that have, not been in the WCHA. Northeastern this year, really good. Last year, they had a really good team too. They've been kind of pushing to be in that mix. But the WCHA is just solid at the top throughout. I mean, you get into the top half of the WCHA, that's a battle. So I think that those games, the Badgers had to win the regular season championship in overtime against Duluth. They had to win the playoff championship in overtime against Ohio State. Those are the kind of things that get you ready for playing in overtime in the national championship game against Northeastern, because they've been there before. They know what it's like. They have that confidence level, maybe some swagger to go in and say, yeah, we're going to get this done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One last thing here on the women, the Patty Kazmaier Award, which is the National Player of the Year. That's going to be awarded on Saturday. Voting is already done. It occurred after the conference championship game. Todd was just teaching me up on this before we started recording. But so that'll be on Saturday. Make sure you're following Todd. Daryl Watts has a very good chance, I would say, of being a Patty Kazmaier winner here. Something that she already did earlier in her career before she came to Wisconsin. What was that at Boston College or Harvard?
Boston College, yeah.
Boston College, yeah. Okay, so something that'd be really cool to see. Beginning of career, toward the end of career. We'll see what happens going forward. But
yeah, I have been told to expect her to be back at Wisconsin at some point, whether that's because the thing that's hanging out there is that next year is an Olympic year. She wants to be in the Olympics, but will Hockey Canada bring her in as part of the year-long centralization? If so, she'll be gone next year, but intends, from what I'm told, to come back the year after and play on the extra year that's been given for this this bonus year here. After that, and if she's not selected for Team Canada, she'll be here next year. That's what we're told anyway. We'll obviously a lot of things can happen between now and then, and we'll see where things go. But you're not going to say you don't want Daryl Watts back if you're the Badgers. Yeah.
There's an open invite. The locker is open for you. Absolutely. All right, so Todd, let's jump into the men's side here, because now that the women are done, that's where your focus is at. National NCAA tournament starting for them this weekend. They're in the Bridgeport, Connecticut region. They are the number 1 seed in that region. They're playing Bemidji State at noon on Friday. You guys can watch it on ESPN2. I want to start there, Todd, just because when we were talking last week on the podcast, you were pretty confident that a 2 seed was more likely. You said that there was some chances with other conference tournaments that were going on, maybe the last 1 seed, and that's ended up being what happened for the Badgers, sneak into that last 1 seed. And really, I've just looking at some of the stats and some of the records from the teams they're going to play, I feel like they're in a pretty solid position here in this Bridgeport regional for not being a conference winner, but still being a 1 seed.
Yeah, and I think that the strength of the Big Ten helped them, at least in the minds of the 6 people on the committee. There's 1 person from a school from each conference. So you've got to think that meant, the fact that Wisconsin won the Big Ten regular season, Minnesota won the postseason. They were both pretty close. I don't think the committee saw a whole lot of difference between Minnesota and Wisconsin, and that ended up being what came out in the seedings, that Minnesota got the 3 overall, Wisconsin got the 4 overall. Then you're looking at the teams that they were in contention with for the 1 seed. Minnesota State lost 5-1 in the WCHA semifinals to I think the 6th seed in their tournament, Northern Michigan, at home. So that's a bad, a loss that you don't want to leave the committees to be fresh in their mind, but it was. Yeah. So I don't know how much that factored in. I think if Minnesota State would have won their tournament, that would have been a pretty good boost to them getting the 1 seed, but they didn't. UMass, could have been in that discussion for a 1 seed, won the Hockey East championship, playoff championship, but they get a 2 seed and they're in Bridgeport with the Badgers. So that's but you're right. It is, there's definitely opportunity there for the Badgers to get through. You've got a first round matchup against Bemidji State that, if they can do what they've done most of the season in terms of generating chances and controlling the play, they should have a pretty good chance of that game. Now, it's a 1-game shot, so you never know. It's one of those, if they have a game like they had in the Big Ten championship against Minnesota, where they don't show up for the first 2 periods, if they have a game like they had the regular season finale at Michigan State, where it was really just, you could sense the nerves. that doesn't necessarily bode well that there's been these butterflies in these big games. So
right.
That's something I'm interested to see how the start of Friday afternoon's game goes, because that'll tell you a little bit about whether they've gotten past that mental hurdle, or I assume it's a mental hurdle anyway. I don't think there's anything physical to it.
Yeah, and that's a product of a lot of these guys have talent. They know that there's multiple NHL players, future NHL players on this roster right now. I think there's just not being in big games together yet. I mean, this postseason tournament, this run, and then now here in the NCAA tournament, these are some of the first big games that this group has played together. And I think you could see that in the NCAA or in the Big Ten tournament championship, where Minnesota really kind of, I guess, snowballed in that second quarter and just kept pouring it on them. And then second period. But then in this third period, the Badgers obviously, flipped the script on them and got right back in the game. But I think hopefully that's a wake-up call to that in a one-and-done scenario like the rest of the way it's going to be, that you just can't have those periods where you kind of fall apart like that. Yeah,
I mean, they've had stretches. Most of the season, they just look like they're having fun out there, right? And then you get to the end of the season, you start realizing, well, that the days are getting short on us here. So, there's a lot to play for, and all of a sudden you start to think about that, and what it all means if you lose. And yeah, I can see how that would kind of cloud your mind for a while, but I do think they'll be better now for having had that experience against Minnesota. They have to be. I mean, that's just, if they aren't, we've been reading them all wrong this whole season, because that's the kind of performance that leaves a mark on you. And if it's not in the right way, it would really be contrary to the example that we've seen from them all season, where they take things and bounce back from them. So that's why I tend to think that they're going to use that experience for the good, instead of having it be something that spirals.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think it might help a little bit too, having this week plus off to really get over it and then get focused on Bemidji State here. And you look at the records and the difference in the conference, like Bemidji State's obviously in a good conference and everything like that, but I don't think as quite as strong maybe as the top of the Big Ten was this season. But when you start looking at this matchup, what are some of the keys that you think that Wisconsin's got to win X, Y, and Z, these areas of the game to come out ahead and move on to the next round?
Well, the power play has been such a big factor for the Badgers all season. They lead something like 31% for the season they've scored on, lead the nation. But Bemidji State's penalty kill leads the nation as well. So where you might expect the Badgers to go into a game, expecting to get a goal on the power play, that's going to be a lot tougher against Bemidji State. Now you might be able to argue that Bemidji hasn't faced a power play like the Badgers, and that may be true, but they've also played a few games against Minnesota State, which has one of the best power plays too. And that didn't knock them out of the top spot in the penalty kill rankings anyway. So that's one thing I think is going to be big. Goaltending is always huge in the postseason. I'm writing about this here in the next couple of days. Robbie Baydoun is going to get the start on Friday, and Cam Rowe would go on Saturday if they get that far. It's going to be the same as what we've seen in the last 7 series. So that's they're happy. They're confident in what they have in goal. Bemidji State has a senior in goal who's got plenty of experience too. Big games there, tournament games, WCHA tournament games. So that's always a factor to keep an eye on, is goaltending.
Right.
And then Bemidji State is a team that's going to try to outwork you, because that's their mentality, that's their ethos to an extent. The Badgers, we saw what happens when they get outworked against Minnesota.
Right.
It doesn't look pretty. So they have to match that. They have to bring that right back and try and control the puck, control the net fronts, those are the things that I think will be a big part of the game, is who's dominating puck possession, who's able to keep the puck down in the other team's end for longer stretches and tire them out. It's going to be a, NCAA tournament game. It's going to be a battle, whether, however it goes, whether it's a 1-goal game or 2-goal game, you're going to see some physicality to it and a lot of intensity. So I think that's the Badgers have to be able to give it back to Bemidji in terms of wanting to, be that hardworking team.
Sure. And that was such a killer in that Minnesota championship game. Or the Badgers just could not keep control of the puck, and eventually they wore them down. So it's interesting that that's going to be another test for them in this opening game with Bemidji, in that, if they don't kind of match some of those long possessions, some of those, multiple shot attempt type of stretches. I mean, I wouldn't say either goalie is playing super well right now for the Badgers. I think Baydun's playing better, but I would say they're both right about, that B to B plus range. So, if you're going to, increase the chances that they're facing, that's not the formula you want for the Badgers.
Right. The numbers say that Baydun has been playing a little bit better over this stretch since they've been in a rotation than Rowe has. So, but over the course of the season, Rowe has the better overall numbers. So, you can make your arguments for either one in reality. And I don't think it's a big surprise or out of the ordinary for Tony Granato to say, we're going to stick with what we've been doing, because that's what the team is expecting, I think, to some extent, and what the goalies are expecting. So to change it right now might be a little jarring. So you've come this far with it. You've done really well with it. 11-2-1 since starting that rotation. I mean, the 2 losses were and the 1 tie really were all kind of clunkers all around. They gave up 5 goals, and I think 6 goals against the Gophers, even though 1 was an empty net. So sure. It's I think for me, this is probably the call that makes the most sense, is to keep going with what they're doing.
Yeah, no, it's going to be really fascinating to watch, because that's going to be one of those decisions that if it doesn't go well, then, you didn't follow this number. If it goes well, then, I followed this, the number that I picked and it worked. Yep. And if it doesn't, then there's something really quickly that people can get on Granato's case about. There's
a lot you can pick through when something doesn't go well. And no matter what you've thought in the past, you can always change your mind and say, and blame someone else about a decision that was made. Yep.
All right. Well, make sure you guys are following Todd Milewski on Twitter, Todd Milewski there. And then on madison.com, lots of stuff coming up with the Badgers being back in the NCAA tournament. You mentioned the goalie story, Todd. What else is coming down the pipe people can keep an eye out for?
Have a bigger story this week coming about. I've talked over the last couple of weeks to 6 or 8 former Badger goalies about who had the best shots that they faced over their time, trying to get just a sampling of who have not necessarily scored the most goals. We know that's on paper. Who's had the best shots and why, and then how Cole Caulfield fits into that, because we know he's, right now he would be, I think, 4th in Badgers history in goals per game. So he's right up there in terms of the best scorers ever. And he's got to be pretty close to up there in terms of the best shot, given what everyone has said about him and what we've seen, what he's done, the examples he's put out there. So I've got that coming later this week, and then obviously coverage from Bridgeport over the weekend.
Gotcha. All right, so make sure you're following along on madison.com and on Twitter for Todd Milewski there. Todd, thanks so much for jumping on the show. People love hearing the hockey talk, so I'm glad to give it to them, and for you to be much smarter than I am about all of this and correct me when I'm wrong. So,
hey, we're bringing you along, though. You're going to be right here pretty soon.
I like it. I got to be honest. I remember telling you this at one of our other meetings, that I really liked watching hockey in person, and I'm getting better at watching it on TV. So
there you go.
All right. Thank you so much, Todd. And for everyone listening, thank you for listening. We will be back next week.